Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Right before TET, when Toan tests the light strings, the whole yard suddenly starts flickering. The new flower pots almost tip over, and one small mistake could ruin everything they prepared. Now let's explore Toan and Tu Diem's story. How will they stay calm and finish in time before night falls? And what finally makes Tu Diem feel safe with Toan? If you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. Late afternoon light slipped through the last leaves of the year and settled over the farm in a soft pale gold. Toan stood on a low stool, both hands holding a coil of electrical wire. His eyes tracked each knot. He worked slowly and firmly, as if every movement had to be in the right place. Below him, Tu Diem knelt on the ground, spreading a clean mat across the yard and smoothing every fold. The way she moved made it feel like she was handling something fragile and precious. Toan spoke quietly, his voice low and even. He wanted everything neat for the person he loved. Tu Diem looked up and smiled faintly, answering in a gentle tone. They did not say much, but every sentence fit. Toan worried dust might fall into the pot of beans simmering nearby. Tu Diem worried he was doing too much alone. The wire stretched tight. Bulbs hung in the air like stars that had not yet been lit. Toan twisted each bulb into its socket. Tu Diem stood close, holding the line lightly so it would not shake. Her eyes followed his hands. When the current flowed, the light came on, soft and white. Both of them paused, their breathing slowed. The glow spread and pushed back the chill of the year's end. In that moment, they looked at each other. No words were needed. Their hearts beat in the same rhythm. It was the rhythm of hope. It was the first TET that truly belonged to them. The yard was still cluttered. Many things were unfinished. But the string of lights that had just come alive carried a quiet promise. Everything would be all right as long as they stayed together. Shadows stretched across the ground, but the warmth between them felt like the first sign of spring hidden under winter. Tu Diem sat in the middle of the tidied yard. Around her were stacks of fresh green dong leaves, white glutinous rice, and the warm nutty scent of green beans. Her hands moved steadily, folding leaves, adding filling, each motion clear and deliberate, as if she were wrapping an entire spring inside every cake. Toan worked on the other side of the yard and glanced over from time to time. His gaze was soft, touched with quiet pride. Tu Diem's voice floated gently among the rustling leaves. She said that when the cakes were done, she would bring some to Thu's mother and to Tu Phan. Toan nodded and smiled. He said he did not even know if Tu Phan had made hers yet. Just make them first. When she finished, they would go together. The promise was simple but warm. It spread slowly through her chest. She remembered the days before this, when Toan's memory was still broken, when tomorrow felt uncertain. Now they were here, building a TET together. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tied the string, not from fatigue, but from emotions that had grown too full. The newly hung lights made the whole yard brighter, as if light itself was spilling from them. Tu Diem lifted her eyes. Toan was smiling back at her, the smile of a man who had found peace again. In that instant, she understood. TET was not only about cakes, flowers, or lights. TET was about being present in each other's lives. It was a quiet vow to keep walking forward together, no matter how long the road ahead might be. Thu's mother stepped into the yard. Her familiar silhouette stretched long across the damp earth in the fading light. She carried the scent of kitchen smoke and field wind. Tu Diem looked up, her eyes brightening. She stood and greeted her, then offered her a seat. Thu's mother smiled kindly and sat beside her. Her hand brushed a half-finished cake, and she praised Tu Diem's skill, saying she knew how to wrap ban chung. The praise landed gently, like rain on dry soil. Tu Diem blushed and said modestly that hers were not very nice yet. But Thu's mother had already picked up a leaf and guided her step by step. Fold it tight, layer the filling just right, tie the string firm. Older hands and younger hands worked side by side, the sound of leaves mixed with soft laughter. She spoke of past TET seasons, times when she wrapped cakes alone. She mentioned the large pots at home. She said smaller leaves meant smaller cakes that cooked faster. Tu Diem listened and followed her rhythm. A strange warmth rose in her chest, like being held by an unspoken bond. The afternoon faded, but the space around them felt brighter because of her simple presence. When she finished tying a perfectly square cake, Tu Diem stared. Her heart tightened. It was neat and solid, as if a lifetime of experience had been folded into every knot. She understood then that TET did not belong only to the two of them. TET connected generations. It connected the village. It carried quiet kindness that was never forgotten. Thu's mother still held the string. Her voice was low and warm as she spoke about helping people in the village, about repayments slowly returning as TET drew near. Tu Diem listened, and her heart grew heavy when she mentioned Toan. She said Toan had recovered his memory, and she was glad for both of them. The words touched old pain, but they were sweet. Toan walked over from the other side of the yard, his voice gentle. He said they were where they were today because of the help from Thu's mother and from Ly Thu. Thu's mother waved it away and said it was nothing, just small things. But her eyes glistened, like a mother seeing her children safe after a storm. Tu Diem looked at her, then at Toan. Gratitude rose slowly and filled her. Thu's mother declined to stay for dinner. She said customers were coming to repay debts. Before leaving, she said that as long as the two of them lived happily here, that was enough to make her glad. The words were heavy, yet warm. They settled deep in the heart. She stood and walked toward the gate. Her figure faded beyond the fence. Tu Diem's eyes stung, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming happiness of receiving such quiet kindness. Toan stood beside her and placed a light hand on her shoulder. Together they watched her go in silence. The farewell carried no sadness, only hope. It felt like a promise that this TET and all the ones after, they would no longer walk alone. Long shadows stretched across the yard when Toan left the farm. His motorbike sound blended into the familiar village road, steady and small. He did not ride fast. He kept a firm grip on the handlebars and ran through the steps in his head. He wanted to surprise Tu Diem in a practical way, with things that would last through the TET days. The electrical shop was bright, with tall shelves and neat rows. Plugs, wire sold by the meter, many kinds of bulbs, including flashing ones. Toan walked straight to the wire and connector counter. He asked about load capacity, which connector matched the wire he was already using, and which clips would hold the line without cutting into the insulation. The seller showed a few options. Toan pressed each piece between his fingers, then chose the ones that felt solid and easy to tighten. He added spare bulbs, electrical tape, and a handful of clips. He did not want the yard to go dark because one bulb failed at the wrong time. He paid, packed everything neatly, and left. He stopped at the flower stall near the market. Damp soil and fresh petals filled the air. Deep red azaleas sat beside bright yellow pots and soft pink ones. Toan checked buds, branches, and the base. He chose plants with many buds, balanced shapes, and sturdy pots that would not tip on a motorbike. He favored buds over open flowers so the yard would keep blooming into the new year. He picked up a few small decorations and extra ties. On the motorbike, he placed the pots close together and slid cardboard between them to prevent scraping. He kept the lights and electrical items in a separate bag so nothing would press on the flowers. He tied everything down and rode home as the sky shifted from red to dim. At the gate, he called her name, just loud enough for her to hear. Tu Diem ran out and paused when she saw the pots and the bags. Her eyes widened, then brightened. She looked at each pot, then at the light strings, as if she might miss something if she moved too quickly. Toan set the pots down one by one, turning the fullest side toward the path. A thin dust rose and settled. The damp earth smell became clear. Tu Diem wiped her hands with a cloth and brushed dust off a leaf. She inhaled once, then smiled as if the yard belonged to them. Toan moved the old stool into the corner so the yard felt open and safer to walk through. Tu Diem knelt beside a red azalea and touched a petal with her fingertip. She said the color reminded her of TET from years ago. She looked up at Toan, and her thanks stayed in her eyes. Toan nodded, smiled lightly, and opened the bag of supplies to recheck the line and the bulbs. They arranged the yard step by step. Tu Diem walked back to see the whole space, then pointed. One pot near the path, a line of pots along the fence, and one beside the stone table. Toan carried each pot where she chose, placed it down gently, and checked that it stood firm. Tu Diem kept changing angles. She shifted one pot slightly left so the gaps looked even. She reminded Toan not to carry too much at once. Toan listened and slowed down. He understood she was looking after him, the same way he had been looking after her. When the flowers were set, Toan opened the light strings. He shook them straight and fastened them to posts and the fence, using the new clips so the line would not slide. Tu Diem stood beside him, holding the end of the cord and handing him clips and tape when he needed them. They stepped back to look, then moved in to adjust. One section sagged, so it went higher. Another sat too close to leaves, so it moved outward. One bulb pointed the wrong way, and Toan rotated it to face down. Tu Diem reminded him to keep the socket higher, away from water. Toan guided the wire neatly to one side so the walkway stayed clear. Toan switched the power on for a test. The lights came alive, flashing in a steady rhythm. The glow lifted off the petals and the ground. The yard changed completely, right away. It no longer felt like a workspace. It became a TET yard. Tu Diem let out a quick sound of delight, then smiled at herself for reacting so fast. She looped her arm through Toan's and said the whole place felt warmer. Toan looked at her with softer eyes and said he only wanted her to step outside and feel happy. They stayed still for a final check. Toan watched the connections for anything loose or any bulb that flickered wrong. Tu Diem straightened one pot that sat slightly off. The night breeze passed through and leaves trembled lightly. The air was cool, but the yard felt warmer under the lights. Night fully settled in. The lights became the main brightness. Red, yellow, and pink still showed clearly under the flashing glow. Toan and Tu Diem stood in the center of the yard, shoulders touching. Tu Diem breathed out and said she felt happy, not because there were many things, but because this year she could prepare TET with someone truly beside her. Toan turned to her, his voice low and steady. He said he only wanted her to feel safe when she was with him and happy in an ordinary daily way. For him, that was enough. Tu Diem held his hand tighter and nodded. She said she wanted this new year to be a fresh start, and she wanted them to keep holding on and walking forward together. Toan squeezed her hand lightly and said he felt the same. The flashing lights reflected on the pots and on their hands holding tight. For you and your home, the idea is simple. Do small tasks, do them solidly, and do them with the person who matters.
Dưới ánh chiều cuối năm, Toàn và Tu Diem cùng nhau chuẩn bị Tết tại nông trại. Toàn cẩn thận treo đèn, mua thêm hoa và vật dụng cần thiết để sân nhà sáng và an toàn. Tu Diem gói bánh chưng, sắp xếp hoa, từng bước làm cho không gian trở nên ấm áp hơn. Mẹ Thu ghé thăm, chỉ dẫn cách gói bánh và chia sẻ những câu chuyện cũ.